we just assigned numbers to the story, so we didn't know who wrote what. So when we decided on the top 3 stories and I saw a familiar name, I thought it couldn't be the same one I know. And then, so this confirms it. Yeah. But there's more than one mark and more than one yard in Barbados, right? You know what I mean?
That's true.
Like, could it be the same one? And then, okay, this confirmed it.
Okay, sorry, we're live now. Okay, we're live now. Okay. Welcome everybody to the Caribbean Magazine Plus award ceremony for the 2022 short story competition. Here we have our chief evaluator, Dr. Nicola Hunt from the University of the West Indies, an eminent professor in English literature at the University of the West Indies. And we have our first place, second place, and third place winner. Our first place winner, David Hamilton from Trinidad and Tobago. Our second place finisher, Mark Hunt from Barbados. And our third place finisher, Miss Victoria Wilchcombe. I am Yuri Kemp. I'm the editor of the Caribbean Magazine Plus and the owner and operator of Arawak Media. Please forgive my camera, please. And we're just going to turn it over to Dr. Hunt. She's going to ask him a few questions. So Dr. Hunt, it's all up to you now.
Okay, good morning to everyone. So let me begin with a note of thanks to Caribbean Magazine Plus for holding the short story competition in its second year. Yes. I believe I'm not the only one who appreciates the opportunity this competition provides for aspiring as well as experienced writers to have a space to share their stories, to have these narratives find their audience, and perhaps create community when they're being read or heard. I wish especially to thank its editor, Mr. Yuri Kemp, for inviting me to once again participate as head judge. I'm grateful for the chance to not only read new works, but to engage in lively discussions with the judging committee about what has drawn us into these new places that are created with your words. So that means I also get to thank you, the entrants to the competition, who had the courage to take the bold step of letting your work venture out into the world without you, and trust that they would find their place. For this year's ceremony, instead of beginning with a brief outline of the judging process and criteria, as I did last year, I choose to offer a few remarks on the 3 stories that placed, and then to invite the authors to respond to a handful of questions about their writing process, inspiration, and choices concerning what they write about. Each of these stories were, for the judging committee, memorable in their own ways. Pearls and Granddads for its touching innocence, To Kill an Alsatian Hound for its balancing act between brutality and naivety, and Kyle for its openness and humor. It was also interesting to note that coincidentally, each were concerned with the child/teenager's perspective, whether it was confronting family tension, intimate partner abuse, or the desire to fit in. We found that each story, in varying ways and to varying degrees, provided a narrative voice or viewpoint that we could trust as youthful or childlike because of its directness, enduring inexperience, or wide-eyed simplicity in its treatment of very significant events. The content of the narratives revolves around familiar, recognizable situations that could have easily been treated in a superficial or cliché manner. So it's gratifying that they avoided following the kind of predictability that makes a story forgettable. From a technical perspective, it was interesting to observe the variation in the handling of narrative perspective, which is the viewpoint from which the story is told. So even though these stories prioritize the child's teenager's outlook, they did so in different ways. So this is the part of my remarks where I slip into using the jargon of a literature specialist. So please indulge me briefly. Pearls and Granddads uses a limited third-person perspective that is predominantly focused on the thoughts and feelings of its 5-year-old protagonist. So that even when the story shifts to her adult relatives, the emphasis is on how it affects or is viewed by the child. To Kill an Alsatian Hound employs an omniscient third-person view that covers the thoughts and reactions of each character that comes into focus in the story. but it is the inner thoughts of the school-aged central character that are consistently revealed. And Kyle goes directly to the source, with the story told in the voice of an adolescent, confronting the intimidating experience of talking to girls by way of a much more confident best friend. Additionally, the choice of language supports the chosen perspective so that the simplicity and optimism of the vocabulary in Pearls and Granddads conveys the wonder, expectancy, and blind trust of a small child. The omniscient voice that creates the boundaries of the story in To Kill an Alsatian Hound is noticeably sophisticated. And I choose to quote here to illustrate what I mean. And this is from the story. A light silhouette filled the window of the second floor. The thin figure moved with a spectral grace. So subtle it seemed, in one gentle breath of the wind, she'd be gone. She was joined by another, a heftier, more substantial shape. This one did not move with such ease. He beckoned her with a mighty hand. She yielded to his embrace. Then their dance began. Now, this provides a striking contrast to when you hear the main character's viewpoint, precisely because it lacks that sense of deliberation and awareness. So here's another quote from the same story. She'd soon realized she forgot her pencil, though, and not wanting to beg stingy Denisha to her right, or ask pencil chewing Akil to her left, she would turn behind her to her friend she knew always had one to spare. From beginning to end, Kyle seamlessly switches register between Caribbean English and Creole. That creates a mix of intimacy and wariness that seems appropriate for a character between childhood and adulthood. I would like to quote here, if I may, David Hamilton. Thank you. Quote, "Mr. Man, I did not send you to school for that. And you better not be doing big people thing. You could barely take care of yourself," she barked one evening after PTA meeting. We were in a popular spot in school, right next to where Mrs. June does sell the box juice. A good bit of parents were liming around as well, but Zena was old school. She's saying anything, anywhere, and ain't care who minds she business. Now I asked David Hamilton's permission because I can't carry the same accent, you understand, right? But I hope I can communicate what my remarks are about, because I could especially appreciate how it moves between English Standard and Caribbean English, sometimes within the same sentence, to create that conversational sense that is recognizably from this region. In different ways, I see these stories as important contributions to Caribbean literature, and I will only name one feature for each, since this occasion is meant to be brief. I have permission to end it by 11 or just before. So Kyle, I want to highlight it for its orality. To Kill an Alsatian Hound with its engagement with intimate partner violence, which is a significant issue in the Caribbean. And Pearls and Granddads for its foray into children's fiction, which is a much needed category of writing for this region. So I think I've spoken enough for this morning. And since this ceremony is about the writers, I would like to turn the space over to them to hear their thoughts about these stories and writing in general. I have 5 questions prepared for each of you to answer in turn. I guess I could decide who will go first with each question. The first 2 questions are about your story, and the rest concern the writing process. So if I may, I'd like to start with Victoria first, and then have David answer the question, and then go to Mark. So for the first question, how did you decide to write this particular story? What led you to want to tell this story in particular?
Well, for a good topic to me for a short story would be something about family and something about life. And kids are the best of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are the best of us. They are the future of the world. And I happen to know little girl that loves rainbows. And so with those three guides, I was able to sit down and put something together that I thought would appeal to adults and children about life and about situations and about family. Yeah.
Thank you, Victoria. David, you get to answer this one. How did you decide to write this particular story?
Well, one of my favorite books ever is Miguel Street, right? By yes, Snipe. Well, I've read that book probably like I going on like 5, 6 times I read that book. So I wanted to create my one of my goals is to create a book like that, like a collection of short stories. So this story is kind of like it is like a universe of stories that exist of an adolescent, like in the 90s, going to school and experiencing certain things. And I wrote another story before like this, and I wanted to write this one. But the reason why this one I think came out the way it did is because this one is kind of very close to when I was growing up, what I experienced going to school and stuff like that. So naturally, I felt, because it had a kind of emotional connection to me, I felt like it would have been a good fit to submit now because it meant something to me. So, yeah.
That's interesting, because my second question has to do with the temporal setting of the story. But before we get to that question, let's move over to Mark. Mark, what led you to want to tell this particular story?
Well, last year, September, I took up a class at UE. It was creative writing, like prose fiction. And I was always on this hunt for ideas and stuff like that, because I'd never written a short story before. And one night I was in my room and I heard somebody screaming upstairs, and I felt guilty because I wasn't sure what I should or shouldn't do. You know, I wasn't like, do I go to be like, oh God, somebody help. I wanted to explore that sense of bystander syndrome and the guilt that comes from that. So the story sort of wrote itself from that moment on. After that seed of idea came to me, it was sort of just like, I thought, what about this from the perspective of somebody who doesn't have the power to act, like a child? And it went from there, really. And certain things just came out naturally, organically, the motif of the dog and stuff like that. So that's pretty much how it came to be.
Okay, perfect. You know what's also really remarkable about this? This kind of has something to do with my third question, your writing process. But let me start with the second question, and I want to go in reverse order, which means I'll go to Mark first, then David, then Victoria. Do you think your story kind of fits within the 21st century? Is that a consideration that's important to you? And it's interesting because you said this is, I think, maybe your first story that you're writing. So was this something that you were considering when you were writing, like a 21st century audience?
I think, like David, I was sort of imagining universality about the audience. I wasn't really mindful about that, although my instructor did ask me a similar question, because she was saying it had evocations of a sort of older sort of narrative voice.
Yeah.
So I was mindful of that after she said it, but otherwise I think I was just thinking about it as a sort of universal evergreen theme, I guess.
Right.
So I would say yes, I think it's suitable for a 21st century audience, but not like explicitly written for 21st century audience. Do you get me?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Kind of going for you kind of want to transcend that particular temporal boundary. I get it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So David, what about you?
It's not set in current time. Like, for example, if you write in an adolescent story now and you don't mention a cell phone or social media, it's kind of like you're not really rooted in this time now. But what I did, so I know for myself that it's not rooted in this time. And if somebody really pieces it together, they'll be like, okay, I can see where this is from. But I don't specifically mention anything 90s. So I just try to keep it like or to just try to just kind of keep it as timeless as well. Try not to date the story with any references. So I would say it's not really rooted in current times, but it's written in such a way that it's not really rooted specifically that much in any time. So I tried as much as possible to make it a little more universal when I was writing it.
Thank you for that. And Victoria, your response.
Well, my intention was to take you back a little in this century so that you could, just settle back a little and get a little more quiet. It's a little more quieter without all the technology. It allows you to think more. It allows you to dream more. It allows you to plan more. You can do a lot of processing in the quiet. And to me, it's kind of a quiet story. It's outdoorsy. It's engaging in nature. It's just the general wonder of life, of simple things like a rainbow. You may be down, people are in their phones, but it's loud. They may look quiet just looking down at the phone, but everything in that is loud. It's out there. It's the world. Everything connects. So putting a story in a setting like that, it takes you a little bit back. It really just takes you back a little, and you get quiet and you read, and that's what I intended to do.
Thank you for those responses. I think that came out of our curiosity as a committee when we kind of figured out the stories that place. We're trying to figure out, but what time period are they set in? Because we noticed that that's what you also had in common. None of these stories actually kind of pinpointed their temporal setting, but we got the sense that it was kind of going for this environment of innocence and kind of stepping away from, like you say, that noise of that we associate with the 21st century. But at the same time, we felt as though each of them were applicable to this current period. Like we can see a young person reading these stories and being able to identify with what you're talking about. So we found that really noteworthy. So my third question, so I'll change up the order a little bit and I'll go to David first, and then I'll have Mark answer, and then Victoria. The third question, when you write, are you focused on the building blocks of narratives, like character, crisis, conclusion, or do you have a more intuitive approach?
I have a more intuitive approach where when I write, I imagine characters like they're on a stage, and like what would they do? So sometimes I'm not very good at setting a plot and like sticking like rigidly to it. I will set a plot and then I will be like, but this character seems like it wants to do this, and then I will switch it around, and then sometimes it could even happen like the ending could be a surprise to me because I see like the character seems like they want to go in this particular way. So my approach, especially with this one, is a lot more very intuitive, where I started off going one way, and then sometimes I might have had to have a change and dress back and readjust certain things. But the main thing I think I would say is the hallmark of it was I let the characters be the guide. So once I defined them properly, then that's how I kind of built the framework around that.
Okay. Mark, I feel as I may know the answer to this, but I'm willing to hear your process. Did you, because of the creative writing course, did you do the building blocks, or did you go with a more intuitive approach?
Well, the way I wrote this story in particular, I just let it come out, and whatever came out, I just let that be the story.
Yeah.
So that was like sort of like a zero drafting process of just word vomit, just letting anything come. And then I went back after the fact and applied those techniques I was learning throughout the class to carve out all the unnecessary things and whatever the case may be. But generally speaking, when it comes to story craft for me, I prioritize my thematic argument. I come back to that all the time. What I want to say, what is the overall purpose of the story? Not necessarily from a didactic or a moralistic point of view, but just what effect do I want to accomplish? So, and for this, I had a difficult time getting to the point where it is now, because I realized with a short story, it really comes down to the final moment, bringing everything together, all those threads that were planted in the past 5,000 words. It really comes down to that last moment. And I was having a hard time because I don't want to like give away my story, but the way it ends, it really is the crux of the narrative.
Yeah.
And I realized that a lot of the issues I had with the ending were because of a lack of support throughout the beginning and the middle of the story. So then that process was one of going back and planting more seeds, like foreshadowing and that kind of thing like that. And because of that, it really re-emphasized how much the thematic argument is just everything for me. It just has to be.
Yeah.
Then you really has to be like, this is what the story is about, clear as day. So I come back to that. I come back. If anything, if something isn't serving that, it has to go. If something isn't doing its job, it has to be like heightened. Everything for that. Yeah.
Okay. So like a mixture of both. Okay.
Yeah.
Victoria. Yeah. How would you respond to that?
Well, my genre that I like to write is high fantasy.
Mhm.
And I could just sit down and relax and go. I could write about anything. I could just run wild with that. But when with a short story that has a specific word count, I need a little guide because else I would just go. So I could set out my intentions. I like to tie things up properly. So I know I have a beginning, I have a middle, I have an end. So after I put all of that on paper, then the real work actually begins. Because you have to say, oh no, that don't make sense, or that don't make sense, or I haven't answered that question. You pose a bunch of questions when you first start writing, and then you have to make sure that at the end, when you conclude, that you have everything answered. So I hope I was able to do that. Yeah.
Yes.
That's my process for a short story. Make sure
Yes.
I answer all the questions and make sure it makes sense. And if I'm trying to appeal to people, so a certain time or a certain emotion, what's the best word that I can use to do that? If I want to appeal to a general audience, I may not just want adults, I may want it to make it readable for everybody. And that was the intention. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So then the penultimate question, and David kind of already answered this in his earlier response. So I'm going to go to him first and then have Victoria answer this and then Mark. Do you think of your work in relation to other Caribbean writers, or do you place it, if at all, in relation to another set of writers? So you mentioned Naipaul when you were talking. So how would you answer that question? Do you think of your work in relation to other Caribbean writers besides Naipaul?
Yeah, for sure. Samuel Selvon is another one I read a lot. I like that style of Caribbean writing where they have a realness and a humor, a kind of a humor by just juxtaposing certain things together or just certain ridiculous things. And I think in my style of artists on that, even Kevin Hussein, who's a Trinidadian writer who I think he won the Commonwealth short story competition. I read some of his work and I see some of those elements, some of that lineage in his writing as well. So that style, I like to read that style. So I don't think my style is exactly like those other people, but I think about and I kind of read those things as a reference, which is why I read Miguel Street so many times as a reference to kind of like a guiding point. Like you're looking at the great masters from before and you're seeing like what they do. And I read that and I look at what I write and I say, I mean, I don't think I will be on the same footing as them, but what can I improve in my work to at least be something that could be in the same ballpark as what they write. So yeah, definitely I look at what they do and see the techniques they employ, the way the dialogue, how they use dialogue with characters to capture a real Caribbeanness and how people speak, how they paint characters, how they describe characters. I look at that. And then I add my own flair, my own experience to try and get something that is very captivating.
Thank you. Now, Victoria, you mentioned fantasy. So should I expect that you kind of place your work in relation to other fantasy writers, or do you have some Caribbean authors in there?
Well, I read everybody. So I read Caribbean authors, I read worldwide. I grew up reading, so I end up loving the written word. So it just made sense for me to, get into writing. And one of my favorites, one of the first pieces I ever read was The Pearl by Steinbeck, and To Kill a Mockingbird, and all of those books that, you know, in the curriculum that they give you. I fell in love with those. And then you read the folk tales like Babuki and Barabi and all this other stuff like that. But my mom is from the Turks and Caicos. So she would sit down and she would have us in front of her and she would tell us these dark and dreary and crazy and funny stories, folk tales growing up. And so that influences anything I write Caribbean wise, because I write so much different styles, you know? So I am just generally influenced just by the love of Caribbean life and the written word in general.
So you're keeping alive that legacy your mother created with storytelling.
I like storytelling. I'm going to be the storyteller.
Yeah. So Mark, what about you?
I don't know how to answer because I feel like I don't really have much work to place in context of anything really. Yeah, I really don't know.
You could answer it this way, like what kind of writers do you think could influence you if you were to continue with short story writing?
Like David said, I do really, really like, especially within West Indian drama, how regional authors or writers represent, like, I guess, Caribbean life and the experience of being a Caribbean person. So I take a lot of inspiration from my surroundings, but when it comes to placing it within context of other authors who do that, for some reason I'm forgetting every single author I've ever read in my life. But I know that
it can happen.
My instructor did urge me to read some more Olive Senior because she said she's noticing similarities between the perspective I chose to write from and so I was thinking, I don't know. I do write a lot from the perspective of a child. So I don't know if there's something there beyond that. But in terms of, I don't know. I also like Victoria, she was saying that I take inspiration from like different genres, different styles, different things like that. I don't know. I really don't know.
I think it's just like everything else is a process. So you begin to find that answer. If you continue with writing, you'll find that answer. There are people that you kind of have as touchstones no matter where you go. So this is the last question. I'm being mindful of time. The last question. So I'm going to go back to the order I started with at the beginning of this discussion. I'll have Victoria answer this first, then David, and then Mark. What is the best writing advice you have ever received?
Well, just go. Just
go.
Because you can sit down forever trying to figure out what to write, how to write it. Should I do it this way, that way? But if you just write, then you go back and you read and say, oh no, let me switch this up. What that don't make sense. Let me fix this. Editing is just is more important than actually putting down the words. But you have to have the words down to get that story together, you know? So let your mind flow, let it go, and just write.
I like that. Just write, concise. David, what's the best writing advice you've ever received?
It might seem like cheating, but I think I'll have to echo the sentiments, the same sentiments, you know, because sometimes you could get a lot in your head and become very stiff if you just like, you know, you're trying to edit line by line. You write a line and then you read it and like, no, that don't make sense, and you edit. It's best to just and then the story doesn't have the kind of flow. When you just telling yourself, hey, just put words on the page, you feel free, and sometimes the kind of language you come up with, you could surprise yourself. And then, you know, I do a lot of editing. Actually, I think I probably might enjoy editing a little better. But
yeah.
You know, but once you give yourself that permission and you could just let it out, it makes the process a lot quicker and easier. So I have to echo that same sentiment as well as the best advice, especially when when you're writing like books, not just short stories, like books that could be like long, you know. I remember when I started and my sister was amazed at that. I would write a page and edit a page. It's like, well, why are you doing that? I did that for months and then I wasn't getting anywhere. And then I realized, just, you know, just go.
Just go, just write. So Mark, do you feel as though that's going to be your best writing advice ever?
It's crazy because I was going to say something very, very similar. That everybody always says that writing is rewriting. And I'll add a little bit more, I'll add like a corollary that for me, I realized that it comes down to trusting that I have the ability to make it better in the future. If it's already on the page, I can still improve it. It's not like carved into stone. It's editable. And that's, you can breathe and relax and know that you can come back to it in the future and improve it then. And I trust my future self to be able to bring it to a certain level of excellence. So trust and editing, those are my two central tenets. Yeah.
I'm gonna summarize for our Facebook audience, because I'm assuming, I'd like to think there's some aspiring writers out there, some people kind of holding on to their manuscripts for a few years, trying to decide, should I just write, edit, trust yourself, right? So I think that's really useful advice for those who are out there. So I just want to kind of summarize and say thank you to our first place winner, David Hamilton, to our second place winner, Mark Yard, and third place winner, Victoria. I don't know if it helps any, but we were going back and forth in terms of the placing because we all had different reasons why we liked each story. So yeah, I think what we just want to emphasize, the same advice you shared with us, just keep writing so that we can keep reading them, okay?
Thank you.
All right, I turn it over to Mr. Kemp to kind of bring us to a close.
Thank you, Dr. Hunt, for this wonderful ceremony. I really appreciate your effort you put into evaluating these scripts, and I really appreciate all the time and attention you take to spend time with us this afternoon to give these awards to these aspiring writers. So thank you once again, Dr. Hunt. I want to thank the winners again, David Hamilton, Mark Yard, and Miss Victoria Wilscombe. Thank you all for entering, and hopefully you guys enter again next year because we do this every year. So this is our second year. We're going to do it again in September again at the end of this year for the 2023 short story contest. Okay, so just a few updates before I sign off. We also have our poetry contest, the Caribbean Magazine Plus poetry contest is going to start in May 19th. So you guys want to be on the lookout for that, because what we're going to do with that, we're going to open it up to groups. Okay, so we're not going to have single entry contestants. We're going to have, like, for example, we're going to introduce it to the schools, and we're going to have schools, if there's a class that wants to enter, we're going to have a tier for 10 people, a tier for 15 people, a tier for 25 people, that kind of thing. So it'll get more people participating and get more people involved in sharing their writing. And so with that, that's all I have for now. So thank you once again for joining us this Saturday. This is Yuri Kemp, the editor of the Caribbean Magazine Plus and the owner of Arawak Media. And thank you for joining our short story contest award ceremony for 2022. Goodbye.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.